What's the fastest way you've ever quit a job and why? I showed up for the first day ready to start a sales job. I'd been hired with some stubble but not yet a full beard the month prior. I thought nothing of it. The beard was neatly kept and short. The hiring manager pulled me aside after the first hour of onboarding right as I started filling out the new hire paperwork. The boss started, "We have a challenge today." Oh boy, already with the corporate speak. He told me that this was a clean-shaven outfit and that I was to please return home and shave. I went home, opened a beer, and sat on my porch thinking of my next move. After an hour or so, I got a text asking if I'd be back. I replied by sending a pic of the company's ad in the local paper looking for new representatives. The person in the ad had a beard. I never went back. Story 2. I quit a temp job after less than half a day because they told me I would have to hold paychecks for employees who didn't return company property. When I told them that was illegal and showed them the law, they said I had to do it anyway. So I quit and went back on unemployment for a few more weeks until I found a real job. Story 3. Not me, but my old master sergeant from the Marines. He retired as a master sergeant who used to be a recon sniper, then instructor for a million different weapons. His first job was at a shooting range. They stuck him behind the register the first day. He said, "I have 23 years of instruction experience. Put me on the range," so they did. The first thing he witnessed was an elderly lady in her 50s shooting a .44 mag. She's holding it improperly and it looks like she is struggling in every facet. She was shooting it because her husband got a new job where he isn't home as often. They live in a rough area, and he wants her to learn how to shoot it. He walks up to her and starts to give her instruction on how to shoot it more effectively and safely. The other instructors walk up to him, pull him to the side, and tell him that if she wants instruction, she has to pay for it. He freaks and yells, "So you're gonna let her be a potential hazard to herself and others on the range because you want money?" and quit on the spot. Story 4. I once went to a day 1 orientation for an office job, where they told us we had to supply a laptop, monitor, and headset for their office environment. I told them it's normal for the employer to supply these devices, and it should have been made clear in the interview process. This was on employees. I walked out, never looked back. Story 5. The boss of a trucking company was a complete a-hole. I was a teenager and supposed to be an assistant around the shop. He had me doing ridiculous crap like cleaning his personal pickup truck and scrubbing the disgusting bathroom with paper towels. All the while he called me a dumb Polak constantly, even though I'm not Polish. What sealed the deal is when in his office he told me to be grateful for the opportunity and that he could have me to do BJ. I left immediately after at lunchtime about 3 hours through the day. I had to go back to grab my check the next day, and he has the nerve to say, "What's the matter, so you don't like working for me? I'm not that bad, people have it worse." I didn't even answer, just grabbed the check and left. I later heard he got sued by a lady in finance and lost the company. Story 6. Tar roofing 1 week. Each day I worked, I gained a ½ inch in height from the roofing tar. My boots were like 15 pounds each by Friday, and I ruined all my pants and shirts. The Hispanic guys never got a drop of tar on them or their tools. Cheers to them for knowing what to do and doing it so well. I just couldn't get the groove of it, and I wasn't cut out to be on hot roofs on the most brutal, humid days of the year. Story 7. Best Buy, before shift even began. Got back from a summer away. Got hired at a local Best Buy. They asked when I could start. Told them any day except the coming Tuesday, as I had a pre-existing ticketed event, which they already said was no issue in the interview. Next day get emailed. Schedule a single shift on the one Tuesday evening. I was assured I'd be off. Planned to call after class, but as I walked out my phone rang. My old boss from a few years ago at a GameStop offered me my old job, so he wouldn't have to train someone because he was lazy. Told him I could start Wednesday. He agreed. I called Best Buy and told them to suck a banana. I remember the manager saying, "Don't be so rash, do you really want to burn this bridge?" I said yes and hung up. Story 8. Wending High School. I quit my job at Wendy's for a Heidi's Deely sandwich chain. Their policy was that employees were entitled to a sandwich anytime they worked over 3 hours, so the manager made sure every shift was 3 hours. Forget the sandwich, it wasn't worth it to drive in. I found another job in under 2 weeks. Story 9. 2 hours. Got a job in a startup bio research lab after college because I had a lot of training and experience in certain equipment and procedures. Within an hour, saw the boss publicly humiliate someone else for reporting that they messed up a particular run. Really not a big deal, maybe an hour gone and $10 worth of reagents at the time. You really don't want people hiding oopsies from you in research studies with many and complex procedures, protocols. Then I saw that we were fast running out of a desiccating drying agent and that we'd have to slow down or stop until more came. Boss said, "Nah, just reuse it." Tried to object, but he jammed his finger into my chest and told me that as the FNG he owned my ass. I said okay and quit. That was nearly 20 years ago. I ended IP tutoring college kids to save up for grad school. Story 10. Technically 60-ish minutes, but it was because I never wanted the job. I interviewed for position A at $20 an hour. I get to the place, and they say, "Oh hey, Just so you know, this position isn't for position A, it's for position B. We called it position A because nobody was applying to our opening in position B. Also, it's not $20 per hour, it's $12.50 per hour, my state's minimum wage at the time. Also, since we're so short-staffed, we are currently in a period where you must agree to any and all overtime assigned to you. Overtime can be assigned anywhere starting from 4 a.m. to ending at 11 p.m., and you have 30 minutes to get on site to start work from the time you get the text telling you to come in. Now, regardless of all the crimson flags here, I told him I couldn't do that, as I lived an hour away. Even if I was already awake at 4 a.m., which likely was never going to happen, it would still take me an hour to get there, so I couldn't make it within 30 minutes. His response? "Oh, it's okay. I know the area where you live. If you speed down the highway, you should make it in time." I declined and left mid-interview. Well, he called the staffing agency I was working through and told them that I had accepted the job and that I was on my way over to sign the paperwork. An hour later, I get home and soon after get a call from the staffing agency asking where TF was. Because they were right down the street from this business. I tell them I'm home. Why? "Well, so-and-so manager told us you accepted the job and were on your way over here to sign the onboarding paperwork. Everything is printed and filled out. We just need you to sign." Told them that was incorrect. I had declined and left the interview early. They go, "Well, we already filled everything out, so you have the job whether you like it or not." So I said, "Okay," I quit and hung up on them. I did not get any response from them in the future about other opportunities. Story 11. 1.5 days, I was beyond desperate for money, and I took a job in telemarketing. I could barely SC together the gas money to drive there, and the bills were piling up. The first day was listening to calls, so I just sat there. The second day, I had Mr. Selling King behind me listening to calls as I made them. He kept yelling at me to be pushy and obnoxious when people would be polite and kind when asking me to please never call again. I excused myself to go take a leak and just drove away. I'm happy that I turned things around. I have a job I love and make a decent living with a good company. I needed that low point to motivate me. Story 12. I was freshly released from incarceration back in 2007 and went to an open interview I saw advertised as I was kind of desperate to find work. Turns out it was for selling Cutco knives. I was too polite to leave once I knew. I got an offer, but immediately turned it down. I was desperate, but not that desperate. Plus, who the duck wants a 6 feet 3 pounds tattooed ex-con with prominent facial scars showing up at their house with a duckload knives? Story 13. 14 hours before my job actually began. So I was working with the Army and Border Control, and the procedure was that you can go for a couple of months with one unit, which will go home, and another takes over the station. You could also decide to stay for a second rotation with the new command. I had built up a really good and professional work with my commanding officers by then, which worked perfectly for everyone involved. Work was done, all polite, no yelling or rank pulling. 24 hours before the rotation, the new commander, let's call him Captain, as Swipe, storms in and starts swinging his banana around. I was up for about 30 hours then with all the logistics of change of command, so I wasn't exactly in a great mood. He proceeds to order me around and just being a sons for the sake of it, nagging on tiny details, telling me that the next months won't be pleasant for me. So I look him in the eye and tell him that I really don't think so, as I withdraw my request for the second rotation immediately. Good luck finding someone else on such a short notice. On top of that, a close friend did the same thing, so they were now missing 2 valuable assets within hours just because of one a hole. He started yelling that I can't and that they will sue me, yada yada. Packed my bag and left. Never heard from him again. Lost a bit of good money, but got paid in Captain Asswipe's stupid face as we rolled out the building. Good times, would do it again. Story 14. Half a shift as a temp. A warehouse packing Christmas food hampers. I was feeding the packing line and had been given no instruction on how to call for more products. I guess I was just expected to know what to do. So when my pallet of crap ran out, the packing line stopped. Some jumped-up team leader came striding over, calling me all the names under the sun because I'd caused the line to stop. I tried to explain I hadn't been told how to call for more products. He called me an a-hole and said something along the lines of, "You don't get your crap together, you'll never work here again." I said, "Well, if that means I don't have to work with an a-hole like you, then that suits me fine." I gave him my coveralls and walked out, ducking git. Story 15. Full-time job as a crew member at a new fast food franchise. The owner must have had some emotional issues because I had just started my shift at the drive-thru and was grabbing a few pastries for a customer when the owner came around the corner yelling at the top of her lungs at me in front of an entire store of customers and employees to tell me I should have restocked the front display. "Bro, I started 3 minutes ago and it's packed in there, chill." In that moment, I handed her my name tag and that and said I quit. She yelled, "So what? You're just gonna quit on me?" I wasn't yelling at you. And that was before I said anything about her yelling at anyone. I said, "Yeah, you kinda were." And 3 people quit the next day. It was toxic to say the least. Story 16. Not me, but a girlfriend. She got a job in finance at a car dealership. She did the onboarding, went to her desk, then headed for the supply closet to get some basic supplies. As she walked past her boss's desk, he screamed, "Are you taking a damn break already?" She just turned around, grabbed her stuff, and went home. Was there about 4 hours. Story 17. One day, on its support position became, we need you to work on this software package. We make in a language you don't know because our developer left, followed by you are good working on electrical systems, right? We need you to do the lighting and other wiring for our trade show booth. My old employer, Royal Mail, had forgotten to send out my redundancy paperwork for me to sign. So the next morning I was sitting in my old desk, chatting with a very confused but happy non-ex-boss. Story 18. I quit what was a pretty simple warehouse job because there was no training. I had to keep racks stocked for people packing boxes. Cool, easy. Where do I get the stuff from? No one would show me. So these packers are on the other side banging the racks with their ducking sticks to let me know they need protein powder. But there's no one to tell me where I can find protein powder. It was frustrating, and it wasn't the job I was hired to do. My friend and I both were hired for a different job there, but it turns out there was only one opening. I left at lunch on the first day. Story 19. I had worked at a popular donut coffee chain in the summer between high school and college, and it wasn't the worst. During my sophomore year of college, I needed some extra cash and saw that a location near me was hiring for nights and weekends, so I figured, I have the experience, why not? I applied inside the store and was interviewed and hired on the spot. The quotes are because they basically asked me if I was fine with part-time only, and if I left my previous location on good terms, and then said, welcome to the team. My first shift was the next afternoon. When I got there, the manager was the only person in the store, and he was talking to somebody on the store's landline. I tried to get his attention, and he glared at me and pointed to the phone. I wrote on a note that I needed a code to clock in and use the register and put it on the table in front of him. He was noticeably annoyed but told the person on the phone that he'd be right back, and he set the receiver down. He took the 2 minutes to set me up in the register so I can clock in and then picked the phone back up and continued his clearly personal conversation. I thought it was a bit odd and unwelcoming, but it's a donut shop and it's 4:00 on a weekday afternoon. It won't be busy. I can handle it. About 10 minutes later, a few people came in and I made their order. One of the customers thanked me and was like, wow, you're much faster than the other people here, and tipped me $5 in cash. The manager yelled over his phone, that goes in the tip cup so we split it later, which is not legal, as he is a salaried manager and I did 100% of the work to earn the tip, but I followed his directions. We get no other customers for about an hour, so I restocked and cleaned some things. This location didn't have a drive-through, so it was walk-ins only. Around 6 p.m., a few middle-aged but not old women, in expensive clothes with fancy handbags, came in and ordered a bunch of things with as many substitutes as you could imagine. I put their whole order into the register 100% correctly, and then made them correctly and quickly. I then went to cash them out, and one of the women said, young man, it's disrespectful of you to have not offered me a senior discount, so poof goes your tip. I apologized and said that she looked too young to even consider a senior discount, but I can add the discount before I swipe her card. She said that's fine, but my friends are coming in soon and they're not going to be as nice as I was, so just put the discount in off the bat. I said, yes ma'am, I understand. And within minutes, a parade of 20 women of a similar age range and fancy dress started coming into the store. I tried to signal to the manager that I would absolutely need assistance, and he just pointed at the phone to his ear and laughed. I was appalled with his behavior as he'd been on the phone for 2 hours at this point, but we had customers, so I went back to help them. The first person in line asked me why I thought it was acceptable to go out back when there was clearly a line, and I expressed that I was trying to get some help to assist them more efficiently, and she just kinda huffed at me. I asked what she needed, and she said the regular. I told her that it's my first day at this location, so I'm not familiar with her order yet, so I'd need her to let me know what it is. She gave me her order and I started to make it, and while doing so asked the next person what she needed so I can more than one thing at once. I yelled back to the manager and said, I really need help out here. He peeked his head around the corner with his phone still to his ear, and then went back to chatting. I got through about half of the order for the giant group, and one of them needed something that the front of house was not stocked in, so I had to go back to the cooler. I said one more time that I need help on the floor and that I need to grab whatever it was from the back, and he just said, yeah, it's just them, you got it. I said, okay, grabbing that now. I went to the stock room, took off my dumb little visor and apron, left them on the shelf outside of the cooler, and walked out the back door. I checked my watch and it was 6:14 p.m. I got a call and voicemail from the district manager the next day, and she said that the manager noticed around 8:45 that I wasn't in the store and that the store didn't close until 9, so I'll be written up for leaving 15 minutes early without permission. I never charged the people for the drinks that I did make, and I have no idea what the group was or why they all came to that store at that time. I also wonder if he was on the phone for another 2.5 hours before he noticed that I just weren't there anymore. I never went back to that store and I got a check mailed to me for 4.75 hours at minimum wage a few weeks later. Story 20, got a job at Walmart as a cart pusher. The first day out of training we experienced flash flooding. Not only did they not offer any PPE, the shift supervisor just said tough luck, I quietly walked to the back, clocked out, and never came back. Story 21. Worked in a film photo studio in NYC. Just did a 16-hour day. The next day I showed up 10 minutes late because of delay with the subway. As I walked in, the boss said they really need their staff to be on time, and as punishment sent me home for the day. I said, "I'm sorry, I'll never do it again." I wrote my duck you bye-bye email on the subway back home. So I wasn't lying when I said I'll never do it again. Story 22. I've walked out of one interview 1 minute after it began because they handed me a piece of paper detailing the job and the salary differed from the job description I had applied for. It was about 20% lower. I questioned this and they said that no, the salary they just gave me was accurate. I thanked them for their time and said I wouldn't be proceeding since you've already proven to me you will mess with my paycheck before I'm even hired. Story 23. When I was 17, I was hired by a big clothing brand store at the time as a floor cashier employee. A week before my first day, they called and said I get 50% off their clothing up to 10 items and those items will be used as my uniform. I told them I wasn't interested anymore as I wasn't in a position to spend a few $100s on clothes. Story 24. 4 hours. I got a job at a propane bottling facility. I had painting experience, so they told me I was going to be working in the paint shop. The room has a hole in one wall where the empty used tanks are coming through, suspended by hooks on this automatic rail system. They go past where I'm standing, through a paint booth, and then out through a hole on the other wall that leads straight to a kiln to bake the paint on. I'm supposed to put plastic baggies on the tank nozzles so they don't get painted, and also remove the tanks from the line if they have too much corrosion. The tanks are going by at like hundreds per minute, and the room is broiling since there is a hole that leads directly to the kiln. Break time comes and the line stops. I go to leave and the guy instructing me is like, "No, break time is the only time the line stops and it's the only time we get to clean the paint nozzles." After talking to the guy some more, he's telling me about all the bladder infections he's had because he never get a chance to use the bathroom. At lunchtime, I went to my car and took off, never even went back for my paycheck. Story 25. Interviewed with a long-haul company. Was told I would be home every weekend as my routes were to neighboring states. Got an offer, took a substances test, went to training and signed the new hire paperwork. Got told to show up the next day to begin our first team drive as I was now officially an employee. I asked why we didn't discuss home time, schedules and training, and the guy asked what I was expecting. He laughed when I told him what the interviewer told me and said I'd be lucky to be 1 day out of every 6 weeks because we have multiple stops all over the country. Return to base and immediately head out again. So I told him, and every other member of management in the room, that they ducking lied to me, and if they lied about that, what else are they lying about? Get your crap in order. Shred my paperwork and never expect to hear from me again. There were also other new hires in the room that overheard it all and started looking at management with wide eyes as I walked out. Story 26. One of those environmental street canvasser jobs where it's about donations in the name of lining investor pockets, saving planet Earth. Put on the shirt, went out and begged people for money on the street. It felt like panhandling, and I'm actually terrible for asking directly for money. I quit and didn't return after the first day. No regrets. Brooklyn 99 got it right. It's great for undercover work. Story 27. I got one of those knife salesman jobs. During the interview, we were told to take notes. After the interviewer told me to stay after the group left. He told me he liked me, and he was going to hire me, but that I shouldn't be on my phone during the interview, that he saw me in the Zoom camera looking down. I was taking notes the whole time. I showed him my notes and told him I quit. I could see the micromanaging in his teeth. Plus, I would have never made sales in that job. Story 28. I got a temp job in college at a beer warehouse helping to pick orders before the 4th of July. Quit after 1 day. The warehouse had no AC, and it was June in North Texas, so it was about 1:30 F in the warehouse, and they wanted us to move so fast picking orders they accepted us to jog with our pallet jacks. On top of that, whenever someone dropped beer and the bottles broke, we were told to just keep going and not clean up. So as you were jogging with a pallet jack in the insufferable heat, every 10 or 15 feet there would be super slippery puddles filled with broken glass to cut you up if you fell. Absolutely not worth the $6.25 an hour in any way. Story 29. Third day of my college internship. It was unpaid and was supposed to be in finance at a bank, working with analysts. They had someone quit and the CEO had me train for 2 days to be an unpaid bank teller for the summer. Noped right out of there. Story 30. In college, I had an opportunity to work at the local movie theater in a rural college town. The owner, Frances, was known to be a gruff and rude woman. I began training concessions at the movie theater after being hired on, and it was pretty mundane. During that time, I was simultaneously offered a job as barista at a local coffee shop. The manager, chef of the cafe, was also named Francis. While speaking to Chef Francis, I mentioned that I was already training at the movie theater. Being a small town where everyone knows everyone, Chef Francis proceeds to say to me, "If you're going to work for a git named Francis, you might as well work for me." Not only was that statement hilarious to me, I liked her vibe, plus tips were better, so I immediately quit during my next training day at the movie theater and started working at the coffee shop. Desperate in my early 20s, I got one of those meat delivery driver paid daily jobs. The interview was like 2 minutes on the phone. Told me to show up the next day at 9. Wait around for over an hour for the boss to show up. People start filtering it. It is one of those selling meat scams. I left after an hour and a half of no boss showing up. Story 32. Worked at Pizza Hell, let's call it. My boss kept joints and wine bottles in her office and would go off to get high all the time. I can live with that at a food service job, TBH. But on my second day, after the girl training me left for 2 hours to get drunk with my other coworker because she learned that her dad was arrested again or something, I asked my manager how to select a pizza with light sauce. She was so pissed and pointed at the easy sauce button and was all sassy. See the easy sauce button? I said, I'm sorry, I didn't know. She goes, you know everything else, how come you don't know this? I'm like, still appalled by that. I was the only sober person in that place, and according to her was a very quick learner, and she got made at me for not knowing one thing. I quit the job over email within 2 weeks of being hired after I had a panic attack over going back in and missing fireworks on July 4th. The location was later closed, and I'm pretty sure she was out of a job after that. Story 33. 2 days. Job felt like a beta switch. Everyone kept giving me different answers for the same question. Everyone I met there looked unhappy and didn't care to greet me. Coworker was consistently work really long hours and doing things beyond his job description. That was a foreshadow to being me one day. A day's work was supposed to be 8 hours, ended up being 14 hours, and nothing was behind schedule, so that told me this is normal. A few more details. The employee handbook seemed really strict about work times and using the computers for anything besides work, and how it's considered stealing from the company was another red flag. Also, oddly enough, rule about talking bad about the company too. The more I talked to the boss, the more things he kept piling on to me to do, and this was before I even started working. Then after I quit, I actually found some former employee reviews on the site. I originally applied, and a lot of fears, red flags I had of the company were almost all completely true when I read the negative reviews. Story 34. I lasted a month in a place called the Pancake Parlor. It was the worst job I've had to date, in my over 20 years of working history. They never explained anything to me and yelled when I didn't write orders down correctly. I had to go to the city. An hour's both ways by train to give them my pay information. 2 weeks in, they had me training other new people while I still had no clue what I was doing, plus a whole lot more. It was the only job where I would cry before, during, and after my shift. I dropped about 8 kgs in weight from the stress of it, and I never even called them to say I was quitting. I just never went back. It was atrocious. Story 35. I bussed tables for 3 days at an upscale bistro. The pretentiousness was so awful it was either quit or snap and make sausages out of the patrons, so I quit. Story 36. A week, if that. A week, if that. Bloke to management and higher-ups in company. I was promised the head technician posting but was assigned to sales until we could fill the sales positions for back to school. PC shop. Students were walking out due to lack of any sort of cohesion. Scheduling, management, and training were all terrible. I am not a salesman. I ducking hate it. I've been building custom systems and repairing motherboards since the late 90s. After the 6th day, there were only 2 part-time with me, at a post I had no interest in being. Manager came up and wanted me to pick up the slack since we lost a few. I had a word with him on my supposed break time, at which point he wanted me to go back into the store as there was a huge influx of customers. Again, ducking hate sales. I build, repair, answering the phone, and standing there at a cash was not what I agreed to. So I left. Story 37. I quit after half a day working at a textile plant switching out spools. I was told to remove the spool when I see the color change. I was unable to do it. My trainer kept yelling that the color change, but I honestly thought they were joking and it was some kind of picking on the new guy ritual. Nope. Come to find out, after 20 years of existence, I learned I'm actually colorblind. Story 38. I had a maintenance position, and this company made me take a picture of every single task, even something as simple as sweeping the floors, and upload it to an app so they can track daily progress. Clearly they had trust issues, and I left after about 2 days of putting up with it. Story 39. 3 days. Boss hit my coworker, small business, hired me, and 2 others through a temp agency. Tasked with upgrading network in a private school. Day 1 went well. 12 hours. Site survey, cable testing, unboxing devices, network device installation, configuration. Day 2. Boss was backing his pickup truck into the parking lot. I watched him get too close to my coworker, who was leaning against a landscaping trailer. I yelled for 5 seconds for him to stop, but he only stopped when he saw the landscaping trailer lurch from my coworker being pinned against it. Coworker said he was fine, but he was limping. He wasn't bleeding. He worked the rest of the day. Day 3, coworker called out with a flat tire. I think he was either in pain or getting high. Boss mentioned, tomorrow I want you to take my truck to the other site a few blocks away and load equipment. Also on this day, we started working in a network rack in a basement that had daisy-chained uplegs, acting as an extension cord. I told him I wouldn't work on that section until they fixed the issue, either run another circuit or move the rack, but he insisted it's not a problem, get it done. Day 4. Didn't show up for work, emailed the temp agency and told them I resigned from this assignment. They called and begged for a reason, but I refused to tell them why. They offered me 50% more pay, but I still refused. I'm absolutely certain that boss knew he was going to get sued by the guy he ran into. I'm also certain that he wanted me to drive his truck so that he could say no, that other guy was driving, and then a lawyer could depose me and ask me, did you ever drive dude's truck? He was looking for just enough to have plausible deniability. I refused to tell them why I quit because I didn't want to get entangled into the mess that boss got them into. Story 40. Wendy's 2 hours first day. Was promoted because I was able to pick up on how to make French fries correctly, and everyone around was surprised as they all took months to learn. Took the trash out after and walked to my car and never looked back. Story 41. I was 16 years old. My buddy's mother got me a job at a diner, just washing dishes on the weekends. My first day of showing up to work, everyone at the restaurant had quit and no one told me they were going to quit, so I show up, I'm there to wash dishes. I'm making coffee. I'm pouring coffee. I'm mopping floors. I'm doing dishes. And all of a sudden, the woman who owns the restaurant comes out and she told me that the dish pans were messed up and stacked up and I needed to get off my ass. And I said, well, if you get out of that office and help me a little bit, we'll get this stuff caught up. And I turned my back to her and went back to washing dishes, and she hit me in the back with a mop. When I turned around and looked at her, she had this crazy look in her face and she pulled the mop back again and was swinging it toward my head chest area. Well, I was 16, I kind of grabbed it, snatched it from her, threw it on. The ground took my apron off and threw it on the ground. I go home. My mother asked me, what are you doing? I said, well, I quit. She said, why? I said, well, that woman hit me with a mop. My mother didn't believe me until I was in my 30s and told her the story again. She finally believed me. 2 days. Story 42. I worked at a comic book store as a part-time sales associate for approximately 2 days. My first shift, I received no training and just organized pop figures, which is fair. The second day, I was working open to close. Someone came and unlocked the store for me, logged into the computer, and told me someone would be back around 1 to cover my break and then back at close to lock up the store. Spent the entire shift alone and incredibly confused. Quit the next day. Story 43. Hot dog and custard store. Boss asked me during the interview if I liked to party, told me he would pay me a certain wage, and after 1 week I got my paycheck and it was over $1 less per hour. This was 2009 and $1 made a huge difference. It became clear that he paid his employees more or less based on if they were attractive and willing to party with him. Story 44. I got hired to be the guy holding a sign dressed as the Statue of Liberty for Liberty Tax outside in February. I was super hard up for money and needed any job I could get. They told at my interview on Thursday that I would start on Saturday. I was feeling down because I really didn't want to do that job. On the way home, I put my last $10 in my gas tank and saw the convenience store was hiring. I interviewed with the manager as I filled out my application and started the next morning. It was closer to home and higher pay. I never showed up to Liberty Tax. Story 45. 2.5 days. I picked up a seasonal part-time job in a kitchen I had worked in previously. I was hired in as a prep cook, but I had done everything there before. That afternoon, the dish pit was still full from breakfast and the dishwasher never showed. There was little prep to do, so I went in and started cleaning. It took about an hour to catch up, but just when I was getting the last bus tubs emptied, Chef came in and started yelling at me about the walls and counter being dirty. I'm standing there in disbelief over what I am hearing from him, because he knows I don't take crap like that. Little guy was still going off, and I took off my apron and hung it up, said sorry but I'm done, and walked off down the hall. He followed after me, still chugging out vitriol. I was about to clock out at the thumb scanner, which never worked the first attempt, and he said something about my mom. Well, that was my limit. I turned around, took 2 steps towards him, and told him if he said another thing about my mom, he'd spend the night in the trash compactor. Then I scanned out, only time it worked immediately, smiled, and walked away. Later that season, I moved to a new apartment, and he was my neighbor. He came outside during a cigarette one night and he apologized to me, but I sure never tried to do him a favor again. Story 46. I got this job as a document translator. They said, the first day there they asked me to just sit at a desk and nobody told me to do crap for a whole ducking day. I asked one supervisor what I can do for that day, and she just goes, hey, well just go read our catalog and put some data in the computer. She didn't even guide me, nobody there did. There's no any translation related work. I was just sitting there at a creepily quiet office with a bunch of weird-ass boring people, and also being ignored and even wasn't allowed to touch my phone for those stupid 8 hours. I went home, had a mental breakdown thinking about how I got tricked into that job. I quitted the very next day, and when I went back there again to get my paycheck for the 8 hours, one of the supervisors literally threw shades at me because I was only there for 1 day. Duck them. Story 47. I quit at the end of my first shift. I was straight up with the owner, asked for my money, and said I wouldn't be coming back because I didn't like the work. He told me that payday wasn't until next week. I asked for $40 cash and he obliged. Even gave me a bowl of risotto too. He was a good guy, but I just didn't want to be a dishwasher. Fast forward a few years and a couple of my buddies got serving jobs at the same restaurant. They all had nothing but good things to say about the owner. Story 48. I quit working at a Sunoco after my first shift. I thought I would just be working behind the counter and stocking the inside, but the place was attached to a propane company, so they also wanted me to fill people's propane tanks. I have Raynaud's syndrome and live in Michigan, so constantly moving from inside to outside in the winter is a no-go for me because I get really bad blisters with rapid temperature changes, and the job would have required me to do just that. At the end of the shift, I told the manager about Raynaud's and how I'm not the right fit for this and to update the job description. Story 49. It was a job that would have lasted all of 2 weeks regardless. But the owners of the food truck I worked at had no idea how to properly schedule people in relation to demand. The day shift was overstaffed, so we were just standing around for most of our shift in a truck that had no AC. The evening shift was understaffed, and that's where demand picked up, so the people in the evening shift were scrambling to get things done for the entire shift. Story 50. I got hired on working at a Subway right after high school and worked my ass off for literally half a shift. The supervisor in charge of me ditched me to go vape in his car. When he got back in, I told him if this is the way he treats his staff, he can go find another sucker to do the work and quit on the spot. Story 51. I did 3 weeks at both Macy's and Fresh Direct. I was part-time at Macy's, and they offered me more hours after a few weeks, but my section was full of grown men that acted like teen girls. Didn't feel like dealing with that for 32 hours, and especially at min wage. Fresh Direct paired me with a driver-helper duo that left me out in the cold for 2 hours while they completed the rest of the route. It just so happened to be the coldest night of the year at the time. Not ideal. I turned my stuff in the next morning. I don't know if they thought it was going to take me 2 hours to complete my stops, or if they thought it was going to take them less time to do theirs, but it didn't really matter. That was bullcrap. There's definitely been times I wanted to duck out sooner, but I decided to stick it out, and outside of Macy's it worked out. Story 52. 1 month. Was working as an electrician apprentice, and watched a coworker fall off a ladder and break his neck. Made me realize that job is a bit too dangerous for me. Story 53. After about 2 shifts, it was meant as a part-time gig, and I gave very specific hours on the application and in person and at the interview. And come to find out, they scheduled me outside it. Then they were shocked I quit. No, I am not going to quit my $31 per hour job for your $12 per hour. Dummy. Story 54. It's finally my time to shine. So I go to orientation for a call center job, say at 9 a.m. on a Friday. We did a tour, which was very unintentionally ominous because the call center was connected by swinging double doors to a very recently closed warehouse for the same business. Anyway, around 10:30 I get a call from a recruiter at another employer that I had been applying with for a while, offering the position with a start date of the Monday after next. The position was paying more opportunities for growth, full benefits, weekends off, dream job for an early 20-something who was unemployed due to burnout from retail management. The call center was providing lunch that day, so I got lunch, ate, bonded with my call center coworkers, and afterward I found the HR manager and told her I got another job and was home by 12:30ish. Bonus, there was no stop sign or streetlights between the call center and my apartment complex, so it was a short ride home. Another kind of messed up bonus, that call center was closed by June of the same year. Hate that for those who were in my orientation class. Story 55. I lasted 1 day at a plastic bottle manufacturing plant. I really needed the money, but the job was awful, but many employees had been there for years. Story 56. In college, the general manager of a restaurant I worked at asked me when was the last time I went home. It was 3 months. Home was 2.5 hours away, but I worked every weekend. He told me to request a weekend off and visit my family. So I did. I even grabbed a picture of the schedule that Thursday. On Saturday, I got a call asking where I was. The schedule was changed Friday. On Sunday, I got another call with the same question. I quit over the phone. Scheduling issues were very common. I had enough of not being able to make any concrete plans. Story 57. First day on the job, and the owner of the company looked at me and said, "What the duck do you think you're doing?" I looked around puzzled and asked if he was talking to me. He said, "Yeah, I'm talking to you." I said, "Look, I'd really like to work here, but you can't talk to me like that." He said, "I'm your boss." I said, "Not anymore. You're a banana." I quit. Story 58. 4 hours. I got hired by telemarketers when I was in high school. My first shift consisted of 2 hours of shadowing one of the old hands, then 2 hours of actually calling people. It was for some charity IRA. The bad part wasn't the hang-ups or the swearing. It was this one guy I got on the phone who would agree to anything I wanted, so long as I'd stay on the phone and talk to him a little longer. Being in a position to manipulate a desperately lonely person scared the hell out of me, and I just never came back for my next shift. They did send my wages, $20 less taxes, in the mail 2 weeks later. Story 59. Technically before I started working on my own. In college, I got a job working the front desk at 3 different dorms, rotating each building depending on the schedule. I trained for 2 weeks at the end of the first semester and was planning on starting the actual job after winter break. At the start of every semester, the university had a draft to determine what our schedules were. So the longest tenured employees get first pick and the newest get last pick, and then I believe it snaked back as to not screw over someone too bad. However, I was out of town and unable to attend this draft. Apparently they just gave me the leftover shifts that no one wanted. I came back after winter break and was told my schedule would be the 5:30 a.m. shift every Saturday and Sunday morning. I sent an email the next day saying I quit. I was a 20-year-old college kid and was not about to put myself through that. Story 60. I got a job as a call center rep for CenturyLink. I was tired on the first day of training. During our scheduled 15-minute break, I laid my head on my desk and decided to close my eyes for 10 minutes. The manager came over and slammed his hands on the desk and shouted, "No sleeping." I said I needed to use the restroom and got up, walked out the door and never came back. Story 61. Didn't make it through the training on the first day. It was a restaurant job and they started telling me to wear flair and gave me a script, told the manager it was way too corporate and walked to a brewery down the street. Started talking to the owners and got hired that night. Worked there for close to 2 years till I moved away. Took a job at a call center, trained for 3 days and quit. It was commission-based, but the 3 days I trained were hourly. I just needed a check until my other job started. Story 63. I was applying for a summer job out of high school and decided to try out Topgolf. It was a fun process with more team building than interviewing, so I was really looking forward to working there. The only thing wrong was they kept misspelling my name on every document, email. After multiple times of correcting them and no correction made, I submitted my paperwork with my name circled and told them to not bother filing it. Best part about this though is that a few weeks later I received a paycheck for a half hour's worth of work for $3 and some change. Story 64. About 20 minutes. I was at a briefing session for a project which my company I owned had won. I was taking notes on my tablet and the customer representative shouted at me in front 8 other people for surfing the internet. I said I was not and I was taking notes and walked out in the next break, didn't engage in the project. Story 65. Never worked night shift before, so I was already worried about that. The job was through a temp agency working in an auto parts factory. I got zero training and they put me at a station putting plastic covers on shocks. It was mind-numbingly horrible. They tell us it's break time, so I go to the bathroom and get a drink. I go back to my station and someone stole the safety glasses I had to buy for the job. I just said duck this and walked out. Story 66. Walked out at Hunter Car. Spent a half day at a job leather wrapping automotive components by hand. Didn't go in the next day because my hands were bleeding after the first day. Story 67. Worked at a daycare while I was studying for my education degree. On my first day, one of the employees hit a child in the mouth right in front of me. I went to the owners of the daycare, and they straight up dismissed it and told me to think about whether or not this job is right for me. I walked out right then and there, called the corporate office and reported them, and still to this day I tell anyone who will listen not to send their children to that school. Story 68. I walked into a job, day 1, for a pet kennel company, aka a pet hotel, and the first thing I saw was a bunch of kennels were full of crap and piss, dogs still in them. I asked the owner and she told me they clean them out after lunch, and again around 5. Not ASAP, not as soon as they spotted it, twice a day. I asked a girl in the grooming bay if that was normal, and she replied, "Yeah, but the dogs go out twice a day for 15 minutes. I walked out the back door, went to my car and called animal control. Gave them my statement and never looked back. I looked up the business about a year later and it was closed. Duck them. Story 69. 3 days. I was hired by a marketing company to go door to door to schedule window consultations. I wasn't about to walk all day in a dress shirt and pants in 80-degree weather, or through the snow during winter. They changed their name years later and tried to get me to interview again. The fastest I was fired from a job was 4 days. The woman I was replacing kept making mistakes while trying to teach me how they used Google Tag Manager. This was seen as my fault. I have anxiety and panic attacks, so I asked to go outside to mitigate a panic attack. They said no. I went outside anyways. When I came back in, they fired me for insubordination. I dodged a bullet there. Story 70. I can't run. I won't run unless a bear or someone with a stick with dog crap on the end is chasing me. I lasted 30 minutes before getting a bus home. Story 71. I thought it was a job that actually required my degree, but it turns out I would just stand in a street corner and offer free cell phones to the poor. The worst part was that unlike other people who had this job with other companies, employers who got to wear whatever comfortable clothes they wanted, I had to dress in a suit and tie doing the exact same thing they did. Needless to say, I quit on my first day. Story 72. First time applying for a job when I was 18. They needed a guy as a receptionist at a small motel. I live on a touristic island, and the motel was at one of the few non-touristic areas. I go there, the motel looks nothing like the online advertisement, is run down and only prostitutes from the nearby titty bars live in the rooms. Place is full of cockroaches, mosquitoes, and no air conditional. While in the Greek summer, I really had no problem with all that, as long as I was getting paid. Until I read about the owner being an a-hole and owing money to former employees. I stayed one night there. I had the night shift. Story 73. Worked at a plastics factory running machines with large spinning plates that weigh probably half a ton or more. One day one of them fell off. The next day one stopped turning, and the owner told me to sit on it to make it turn. I said absolutely not. He then threatened to fire me. I simply turned around and walked away without a word. My supervisor came running after me, but I got in my car and drove away and never went back. This was 2008 during the recession in the U.S. My life was not worth the paycheck then or now. I had been there maybe a month. Story 74. About 2 weeks, I went to a hiring fire for a warehouse job. During hiring, I was told the position was for a forklift operator, which I was more than qualified for. I get there, do all my onboarding, and they tell me I'd be sorting and stacking pallets by hand. I had to put them into good, okay, and unusable piles. I was desperate for work in 2009, so I stuck with it as long as I could. But after 2 weeks, I told the boss it wasn't for me. Story 75. Not me, but a former coworker. His first job out of college was a company that rhymes with AD Centworth. He made it to Friday lunch on his first week, left for a sandwich and never went back. He said it was the biggest scam and they are basically ripping people off of structured payment or annuities paying like 10 cents on the dollar or less. Story 76. While I was filing out my tax papers, the first red flag was mandatory morning prayer. I was a little sketched out by that. Then when they told me they work 6, 12, 14-hour days and a short 10 on Sunday every week, I pieced out faster than a vegan in a meat market. Story 77. In the first 10 minutes, I had arranged to meet the boss and drive along for a limo driver's job. Met him at the garage and he gave me a rundown of what the job entails, and I thought about it, excused myself to go to the bathroom and came back and told him it wasn't for me. Story 78. DoorDash. I'm not driving across town, standing in line at Chick-fil-A and driving across town to bring it to you for $3 and no tip, literally one day. Never again. Story 79. I was shadowing a car salesman who I observed selling a woman on Social Security oversized used 10-year-old truck. She wanted a car for more than the dealership's price on the website. I didn't want to make a living by taking advantage of the naivety of others. Story 80. 3 months. Was a contractor working full-time when the manager liked me and wanted to hire me as full-time employee. After reading the details, 9/5, 2 weeks vacations, 4 sick days, surrounded by these white picket fence people, I reflected on my experience there thus far, and tried to project my future self there and just felt sad. I couldn't see myself in a corporate space with such rigidity, although financially stable. Rejected the offer, quit, and then took the dive into freelancing. Very happy where I am now. Story 81. Exhausting, tedious work and low pay. They pay senior or external people significantly more. It's part-time, but I'm not going back. Story 82. Why I worked in medium secure psychiatric hospital and was left alone with a 2-to-1 patient. Won my second shift. The patient attacked me and the staff tried to cover their asses and lied. The hospital had a documentary made about it a few years back because an investigative journalist went in there undercover to see how it was failing. The journalist exposed them hard and rightly so. Story 83. Just out of high school, my girlfriend and I applied and started working at a UPS loading facility on the same day. About an hour into our first shift, she walked up to me and told me it's too hot in the back of the truck, so she quit. I was her ride, so I quit and took her home. 15 years later, I applied for a quick shift after work and they told me I'm still not allowed to come back. Story 84. First or second day. Wanted me to pretend to be the fiance of another employee while being a mystery shopper for apartment rentals. Basically judging real estate agents while pretending to be part of a soon-to-be married couple. Couldn't do it. Story 85. Worked at a mine for about 3 hours. On the tour, my boss told me to be careful around the haul trucks because half the drivers were drunk and the other half were hungover. I thought it was a joke until 1 minute later I saw a truck crash almost full speed into the rear of the one in front of it. No thanks. Not dying in a clay pit. Story 86. Started working at Sears in between jobs. They were in the middle of a management change. No one was willing to train me and they kept forgetting to give me a schedule. I got a call for a full-time temp job while on the clock. Accepted it, wrote a resignation with pencil and lined paper, and dropped it in the manager's office. I was there less than 2 weeks. They went out of business just a few weeks later. Story 87. About 5 hours. The carpenter I got paired with asked the foreman when would his check clear. I packed up and drove to the nearest payphone and called the union hall. Had another job the next morning. Back in the early 90s, cell phones were still special and expensive. Guy asked this while we were opening our lunch. Story 88. When I was a kid, I got a job at Walmart. The position was called stockman. I thought this meant stocking shelves with product. My first day, I found out it means cart pusher. Then, an hour into gathering carts, some 500-pound man crapped himself on the store mobility scooter and they told me to clean it up, dropped my cart pusher vest on the ground and walked out. Story 89. Or 3 days. My third day working at a restaurant, they wouldn't let me take my break. I was a minor. The manager said they didn't have anybody to cover my position, so I couldn't take it. He said this while he was sitting at an empty table in the back reading the newspaper. My dad, who basically worked retail his entire life, told me that was incredibly illegal, so I just never showed up again. Story 90. Long time ago, I was a line cook, got an offer from Applebee's while working at a local, went to help them open and stocked all of the pre-packaged stuff on the shelves, quit on my way out. I wanted to cook, not assemble pre-made stuff. Story 91. Telemarketing. Quit after 4 hours. They gave me 1 hour too. memorize a bunch of papers, and then sat me at the phone computer. Slowest 3 hours I've ever worked. I'm not even sure I got paid, but I didn't care at all. Got a temp job at a kindergarten some weeks later, and 3 months after that, I worked industry for 1.5 years. What's the quickest you've noped out of a job? I worked in Claire's for 1 day. At the end of the shift, she asked me to put a bucket load of tiny earring packages back on the walls. A few hours later, I finish and apparently misplaced a few of them, so she threw all of them to the floor and said to do it again. Nope. Story 2. When I was 16, I had an interview at a local pizza place in a not-so-good part of town. I was hired, and as I was walking out, 2 guys came in and robbed the place. The manager gave them the money in the register and they ran out. I looked at him and he said, "You get used to it." I never went back. Story 3. Mine had to be when I was 18 and working at Blockbuster. I was helping the manager during the before open shift, getting new items stocked on the shelves that came in that morning. My mom called me and told me that my dad was having a heart attack, and she was panicking while waiting for the ambulance. Why did she call me at work to tell me this? The Blockbuster I worked at was in a strip mall type area behind my cul-de-sac. My house and the Blockbuster was separated by a small alley and a 3-minute walk. I told my manager what was happening and asked if I could leave to help my mom while they waited for the ambulance. She said no. I just stood there looking at her, thinking she couldn't be serious. I would be gone for all of 10 minutes and back helping her if needed. She stressed how important it was to get the things done that needed to be done, and I could only leave if I called around to the other workers and found someone to come in and cover for me while I was gone. I took off my name tag, slammed it on the counter, and walked out. I never went back for any reason. For any who might wonder, my dad came out fine, was in the hospital for a few days. Story 4. I was 22 living in NYC, young and dumb, and got an interview for a so-called job in finance. I was invited for the interview to a big fancy hall in a midtown hotel. There had to be a couple hundred people there. Well, the lights dim, the projector goes on, and our guy starts talking about money and money management. Then a single human icon appears on the screen, then 2 under the single one, then 3 under those 2. Mother ducker, it's a pyramid scheme. I walked right out. Damn Primerica, and they're hiding under the city umbrella logo. Story 5. At the interview, they were late. No one knew where I was supposed to be, and as the interview went on, it became very clear that what was advertised as a programmer position was actually tech support. Story 6. It was a liquor store in a not-so-good part of town. Part of the orientation included advice on keeping the pervs away from the dirty magazines. If you don't, you'll find them jacking off back here. And how to use the shotgun by the register when, not if, the store gets robbed. It's better if they're not around to tell their side of the story. Nope. It was a summer job when I was home from college. It paid min wage, $4.25 an hour, I think. The rack where the adult mags were was visible from the counter, but the pervs would walk by the rack, grab one, and head for the back corner where they do their deed. I did not fire the shotgun as a part of the training, but I was, and still am, familiar with firearms. Story 7. I once saw a Craigslist ad for a stereo salesman. I showed up to a warehouse where a bunch of dudes got into a minivan. The owner told me to go on a run and see how it is and then talk about the job. Turns out all these guys did was lie and con. They would go up to strangers and say, "Hey man, my cousin got this stereo, but he just got arrested and I don't need it. It's worth $500, but I'll gladly sell it for $200. Then use pushy tactics to get people to go to the ATM and give them money. The system was a piece of crap off-brand, and I overheard the owner saying in bulk it only cost him $20 to buy. Yeah, I noped out of this pretty quickly. I also called the police. This was in 2010. Story 8. I had a job in a salad plant. Those bags of salad mix a lot of restaurants use. I was there for 2 weeks coring lettuce in front of a conveyor belt. 8 hours a day, pick up a head, slam it, pull the core, put it down. Next, you talk to your coworkers or you plot the downfall of Western civilization. One really sweet lady had been there for 10 years. 10 years on the lettuce line. She got called into the office and was gone for about half an hour. She said, "I won't be here tomorrow." I got promoted. I asked what she'd be doing. Cabbage. I didn't quit. I wished her well, dropped my crap, and walked out. I feel bad about not quitting, but I was young and well. 10 years. That was 28 years ago. Had I stayed, I might be up to carrots by now. I sometimes wonder how my life might be different had I stayed. And in those moments, I celebrate every decision I've ever made. When I say I didn't quit, I walked out. I didn't formally tell anyone I was leaving, and I provided no notice. I've never left any other job this way. Story 9. Second day at Rue 21, and the managers plus other coworkers all went out to lunch together and left me alone in the store. I wasn't able to ring up people yet, and the store was packed. I just walked out. Story 10. Wanted something part-time when I was at uni. Applied for it at the local cinema chain and got an interview. It was one of those high turnover places that meant if you got an interview, there was a 95% chance you got a job. Guy on the box office radioed to his manager and was told to take me to room 7. We got to room 7 and wait and wait and wait. About 25 minutes passed before the manager starts screaming abuse over the radio because we were not in room 2. So off to room 2 we go, on the other side of the building, 15-screen cinema. The manager starts trying to turn on the charm, and I basically say, if that's how you treat your employees in front a job candidate, there is no way I am ever working for you, and ask the other guy to show me out. I'm sure it made no difference to his behavior, but it saved me a lot of potential abuse. Story 11. Cold calling people about injury claims. Have you been injured in the past 3 years? That kind of thing. The thing that really irked me was that all of the people I called in those 20 minutes were polite, said they're not interested, and they were just sitting down for dinner. I realized it was a horrible job, and I was in no way cut out for it. I left after 20 minutes and just walked out the door without a word. Story 12. Was 19 and started work at a Lube Pros oil change shop. Manager was a 24-year-old guy who, within the first hour of me working there, bragged about hanging around the trails near a local high school and beating up 14 and 15-year-olds for their money and weed. He also said that if I'm cleaning out a car and I find weed, or if I see pills, to take them and give it to him. He had a racket where he would steal illegal things from people's cars and threaten to call the cops if they didn't let him keep it. Left at the end of my shift, called the corporate number and quit, telling them everything this guy was doing. Drove by there the next morning and a cop was questioning him. The place closed a few months later. Story 13. My first day on a carpentry job. A 20-year-old kid, I was 22 at the time, shot me with a nail gun from about 20 feet away. He thought it was hilarious, and so did everyone else, including the company owner. Noped right the duck out. Story 14. Photos listed as a marketing position. The guy doing the interview started showing me and the other candidate how sharp Cutco knives are. Turns out it was a pyramid scheme. Guy kept asking if I wanted to sign on to buy some knives to sell. The other candidate went to the bathroom and never returned. I felt really awkward. Also needed to wait to be picked up, so I stayed for the whole thing. Story 15. I work as a nanny, but when I first got into childcare, I was just babysitting. So it was my first night babysitting for this one family. Things went well. Changed some diapers, put the baby to sleep, and that was about it. Parents come home and are very drunk. They asked me to stay for a little while after they got back, which was weird. Then they offered me, a 16-year-old at the time, a drink. Feeling a little pressured, I took it and just sipped on it. Then the mom got really close to me and says I probably shouldn't be driving home after having a drink. Once again, feeling a little pressured, I was thinking about accepting. So I asked if I'd just be sleeping on the couch. I'll never forget her next words to me. She says, "Oh no, honey, you'll be going to bed with us." I noped out of there so fast. I think I ran to my car, but it was kind of just a panicked blur. Left my purse there and everything. Story 16. I remember going for a marketing job interview. The interview was I had to get on a bus with a group of other people who worked there and go to this really scummy council estate, UK, and knock on people's doors and ask them if they wanted to donate to charities and things. It was really odd. I was following this guy around for around half an hour while he got doors slammed on him over and over. I mentioned, "Man, the pay must be great if this is what you have to do all day," and he then told me he wasn't paid a penny. It was purely commission-based. Every person he signed up, he got like 50p. I just laughed and walked off. Story 17. I was interviewing for a contract position at a very small game development company, and they told me they were looking for someone to help finish up an existing project. Literally, the game looked like it was made in mess paint, as if they had just hired some random guy off the street and asked them to make some art for them. Granted, it's a mobile game and sold for the standard 99 cents, so maybe that's not the worst, but the game itself doesn't look engaging at all either. But I figure worst comes to worst, I could make some money on the side with some low-effort work. Then they told me that my pay would be a percentage of the sales. Noped right out of that one. Story 18. I went for a trial shift with a door-to-door sales company. The guy I was partnered up with told me that if he didn't make above the target sales, he was coming out with the equivalent of £3 per hour, which in the UK is well below minimum wage. This was commission-only self-employed role. Noped all the way home that day. Story 19. I went into an office for an interview. They said they had several positions available, and I wanted to do some admin stuff. Well, after the interview, they told me to get in a van to do the next part of the process. Turns out we drove an hour away so I could shadow one of their door-to-door salespeople. They would ask residents to go into their basement to check their hot water heaters to see if they were eligible to replace them with their company's own. I felt pretty uncomfortable about this, and pretty pissed my whole day was gone doing this. The worst part was the girl I was shadowing spent half the day sitting around in the truck reading magazines and waiting for people to come home from work. I was sort of asking questions about the job, and she got defensive and said, "Well, I decide if you get this job or not." To which I replied, "Yeah, I don't know if I want to do this." But she kept insisting that it was her who decided if I worked. Don't think she understood I meant that I didn't want to do this crap. Ducking waste of a day. Story 20. Back in the 90s, I worked at a fast food restaurant to supplement my military income. I'll just say it was associated with a king. Lasted all of 30 minutes. During that time, I witnessed an employee puke into the sink used for washing utensils without cleaning it out before it was used again. Then another employee dropped a cooked chicken patty on the nasty-ass floor, picked it up and put it on a bun to be served. At that point, I just walked out the door, never to return. Never ate at another fast food place again as a result. I guess in a way something good came of it. The educated guesses as to which king I may be referring have made my day. This is why I love this place. Thanks for the laughs. Story 21. It was a shop that refurbished train suspension hydraulics. 40% of the guys were missing at least part of a finger. Maintenance guy was missing 4 on one hand and 1.5 on another. Half the guys were high and the guy training me stormed out halfway through the second day. I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna dip out now. Story 22. Back in college, I used to work part-time as a nanny. One summer, I landed a really sweet-sounding 40-hour-per-week Monday-Friday nannying job, looking after a baby and toddler. I was super excited about all the money I was going to make working that many hours. But the weird thing about this job was that the unemployed dad was also going to be at home with me. He was supposed to be spending all his time looking for a job, and I was watching after the kids while the wife was at work. Literally that first week, on day 2 or 3, he starts hinting about his marriage problems and how his wife sleeps on the couch. The next day, he asks me to try out his fancy new massage chair. I reluctantly agreed, and he just stared at me while I laid on this vibrating chair and was like, "Oh yeah, nice, great, thanks." He then offered to give me an actual massage sometime, and maybe I wouldn't mind giving him one too. On Friday afternoon, I went home, told me parents who I was living with for the summer, everything, and my mom called the guy and told him I wasn't coming back the following Monday or ever. He then sent me a text saying he was disappointed in me. And his poor wife. Story 23, was looking for a sporadic part-time job. Applied at this little catering company that had been around for a while. Showed up for the interview and realized that a rich guy had bought it 2 weeks earlier for his wife to have a hobby. They fired everyone and hired friends' kids to help out. I was literally the only one with cooking or hospitality experience. They get me to help out for a few hours to see if they like me. We get along and there are a couple red flags, but the pay is about 50% higher than the going rate. We agree to meet on the Sunday to finish up prep for the week and get everything sorted for my role. Show up 15 minutes early and nobody is there. I waited 30 minutes and said duck it, since I literally just started incident, have her number, but she had mine. She calls the next day at 8 a.m. demanding I don't go to my regular job and get in there to help her out, since she waited an hour for me. I told her I was there at 2 and waited. She then explodes, saying that she owns the business and was with her husband at brunch, so it would have been rude to step out to call me. Then she goes full Amy's Baking Company on me, goes off on how she fired everyone because these cooks think they knew better than her. But she goes out and eats all the time, how she knows more about restaurants than anyone in the city, and how as a grateful employee I should have sat and waited for her to finish her very important brunch. I ended up hanging upon her. They were closed within 3 more weeks. Seems she knew so much about restaurants, she forgot that to own a food service business, you need a food handling certificate, and at least one person with certification. Story 24, worked at Target for 2 days. On my first day, a coworker warned me another coworker may stab me if I got too close to him or walked behind him. Our job was restocking product on narrow shelves in cramped aisles. Left to work at a casino, which was considerably safer. Story 25, 3 days after my 2-week training. I was supposed to be a seasonal temp worker for a national propane company. The job distribution and training consisted of taking calls off hours for people who wanted refills and acting as a messenger service, referring their contact info their local store when they opened the next day. Easy peasy. When I got out onto the floor, I found I was actually expected to be a dispatcher for drivers and also first point of contact for all emergency situations, things I had never been so much as briefed on in training. My first shift, I had to field a call from a local police officer who was on site to a horrific propane truck crash. I got to wake the guy's district manager in the dead of night, tell him his worker pass, and the overturned truck was blocking a few lines of the freeway, and the police were trying to get a hold of him. That was just the start. A customer got the smell of garlic and eggs in the house. I got the call. What do I do next, Miss Dispatcher? Duck if I know. Get out of the house ASAP. Code detector is going off. I got the call. Instead of 911 for some reason. I had zero interest in being an underpaid, not trained emergency dispatcher. It's the only job I took off on without giving a 2-week notice. I was nice enough to finish out my shift on the 3rd day, but that was it. Story 26. I went to my orientation at a boot factory. They're government contracted and so pay minimum wage, so I figured I'd work there a while and look for something better. After we do the usual paperwork signing and such, we're taken as a group onto the factory floor for a tour. It's hot, it's crowded, it stinks, and everyone working looks annoyed by our presence. Okay, I guess not everyone loves their job, right? No biggie. I'm sure this won't be so bad. Then our guide informs us in no uncertain terms that our coworkers quite often give new people bad information to get them in trouble or make them mess up. They'd even be the ones to rat you out. Then we're told that our foreman is the type to yell for no reason, ask people if they're drunk in an accusatory way for no reason, and is generally a giant a hole. I took a few moments to think after these last revelations, said nah, and walked out of the building without a word to anyone. Damn that crap, Captain. I'm not putting up with all of that for $8 and some change an hour. Story 27. Many years ago, I worked at a popular sports bar as a line cook. First day they had me train with a guy who didn't speak English for 2 hours. Not a huge deal. Mostly you observe people in a kitchen, and that's how you learn. Owner came back and said she was scheduling me to be alone the next day, which was Super Bowl Sunday. Noped out of there so fast, left right then and there. Story 28. Got a job at a factory that made cardboard cutouts, or the cardboard for cutouts. It was a first shift job, had to be up at 4 a.m. and was off by 4 p.m. The guy that I was paired with to show me the ropes was this hillbilly dude who just talked about eating the boss's daughter's ass all day, and what he did to his wife's ass. Was only there a day and a half. I left at lunch break of the second day. Story 29. Was hired as an intern manager for a local nonprofit recycling plant. This meant I would hire and train interns for this amazing work opportunity. Turns out for them, interns meant working for free doing basically everything for the organization event and marketing-wise, while also cleaning the bathroom and taking out trash for the whole place every week. That's actually super illegal for being way too close for slave labor. I was on contract for minimum 6 months, but I managed to get out of it after 2. I ain't risking my career for their shady business practices. While yes, it is legal for nonprofits to have unpaid interns and give them a level of responsibility, this place had no marketing or event planning staff and relied on interns to be able to do the jobs and have the quality of a professional. Besides always being hounded by the CEO that the interns who had no experience or training wasn't producing the same quality of work, someone who's been in the industry for at least a few years. This does enter a gray area where even a full nonprofit may be protected. Story 30. I went to an interview right out of high school and they made it seem so exciting, and mind you, I'm socially awkward. I'm not one to stand up and just piece the duck out in the middle of something, and I'm not one to enjoy playing popcorn while reading. But when the supervisor brought out a box to show us how to put together a vacuum cleaner, we'd be selling door to door. I noped the duck out. I stood up, put my coat on, grabbed my keys and said no thank you and left. I received probably 10 phone calls that day asking if I'd come back. Story 31. 1 week. It was 1985 and a collections agency was looking for an IT guy. It was basically desktop support on some IBM PCs. It took me a week to realize what a soul-deadening place that was, and I bolted. It was mutual, actually. They saw how I was reacting to some of the techniques the collectors used. The targets were mostly old people who were encouraged to sell family heirlooms and the like to pay off debts. Story 32. I was unemployed for a couple months and started applying for pretty much any job I could do. This one was a basic small biz IT support contractor. The employee the interviewer introduced to me mouthed run when he turned his back. Story 33. Found out that the educational assistance they touted in their advertisement applied only to full-time employees, and that they both defined full-time as no fewer than 40 hours and kept anyone who would apply for that assistance from ever being qualified for it. None of this was advertised, and the people I interviewed with assured me, a college student, that working 21 hours a week would get me the benefits. Too bad I read my contract before signing it and called them out. Don't ducking lie to your employees, especially during an interview on something that can be easily and swiftly disproven. If you're willing to lie to me about this, what else are you willing to lie to me about? I did their training before being offered my contract, so I count it as having worked there, badui. Story 34. Not really that quick of a nope out of a job, but I've only had 3 jobs in my life and this still pisses me off to this day. I signed up to Milios to work as a delivery driver. My parents said to get a second job, and I said I could do deliveries, and since it was their car, I felt that I had to go through them to see what they thought of the idea. They were okay with it, so I decided to try for the job. I get there, and this sweet old lady manager sits there with me while I'm filling out the employment form. She asks about the hours I'll want, how the job will be, and just generally chatting and whatever. I was going to be paid $2 less an hour, but she said that tips would make up for the wage drop. My parents said similar, so I figured duck it, I'll take a chance. I start working a week later after everything went through and I come into work on my first day. Immediately I'm asked to take orders for people at front counter. I say that I was hired as a driver and they said they can't really pay me to just sit around all day, so I should be working. Immediately I start thinking about how weird it is. They barely teach me how to take orders. The few people working there just were like, dude, take his order. And I had to say that I didn't know how to do that. They really didn't know how to train people, and it was very obvious from the get-go. They constantly just assumed I knew things, or that I would just understand eventually. Once I got my first delivery for the day, I booked it and just got through the order as quick as I could. It was nice, not gonna lie. Pretty nice job, and I got a $5 tip, so it was sort of worth it, I guess. The moment I got back, they asked me to start sweeping around the place and to wipe down the tables. I remark again that I was hired to drive, and the manager replies with the same thing as before. We can't pay you to stand around and do nothing. I figure, alright, whatever. I sweep up and they send me home after, I would say, maybe 3 or 4 hours. The next 3 or 4 days were similar. A few hours of work and only 1 order per day. The money was not adding up, and on the final day I worked there, they told me to make sandwiches. I told them I've never done that, and that, oh, but you work at big restaurant chains, so you'll be alright. neglecting that I've never even touched any of the food. I immediately have no idea what to do and they explain nothing. I'm supposed to be putting meat on sandwiches and sauces on the sandwich buns, but nothing is labeled at all. I keep asking them for help and one of them straight up just says, "Dude, I'm kind of busy right now." One of the customers makes jokes and stuff. "First day, haha, it's fine man," to ease it a little bit, but I'm getting more and more angry since they actually don't even bother training me or anything. They just shove me into making sandwiches and expect me to know everything. We get through the small 20-minute rush and one of the staff tells me to start washing lettuce in the back. At this point I decided I'm going to quit, and I'm just trying to find the quickest way to a regional manager comes in and starts talking with the manager for a bit. I get finished with the lettuce and I talk with her about my employment. I tell her that I was hired to be a delivery driver, and that I was not doing that while being paid $2 less an hour. The numbers weren't adding up, and I honestly did not believe this job was worth my time or for me at all. She said it was fine, and that I would be taken off the schedule and be sent a check for the time spent working. Never got the check. Don't even care. I hated that I had to do the same work as everyone else around me and be paid $2 less an hour for it. The money was not worth it at all, but the staff was alright, if a little awkward since they were all still in school and I wasn't. I'm a dropout, sue me. They just could not train people for crap, and seem to have no ability to understand that new people don't know crap. Story 35. Two different ones. First was a scheme going door to door soliciting donations for the environment. You had to get 5 donations or something to get paid. I worked 1 4-hour training shift, then left. Second was door-to-door dollar item sales. After an hour I realized it was MLM and told them no. But since I was in their van, I had to stay the whole 8 hours. Story 36. I had an interview at what I thought was a regular steakhouse in a new town I had just moved to. The interview went well. It was just before the restaurant opened, so it was pretty empty. At the end, a waitress starting her shift walked by in assless chaps and a thong. Turns out that was their uniform. The manager called like 30 minutes later saying I got the job. I had to politely decline that one. Story 37. Went into work night shift. I was told I would be made management after 6 months and was supposed to be trained by the night shift manager as he was retiring. Said manager looks at me and says, "You've had retail experience before?" Me, yes, him, "Okay, great, here are the codes to do anything you need to with the register. I'm not supposed to give them to you, but here they are. Don't call me for anything or I will fire you. Go use the bathroom right now and I'll be back to relieve you in 2 hours. The night shift manager was about 30, which I found really strange as how the duck would he be retiring. So I asked him, "Are you retiring?" After coming back from the bathroom, he looked directly at me and said, "No, they tell everyone that to get people on night shift." I looked at him and said they shouldn't lie. He replied, "Why not? We need people." Almost laughing, I said, "Here's why." I proceeded to walk straight out the front door saying, "I quit." Story 3800. Not sure if this counts, but it looks like a good majority of the replies on here revolve around noping out during the interview process. Had an interview at a large state correctional facility to be a nurse. I came with a sheet of paper full of questions and a pencil. I had a lot of questions to figure out whether the insane pay was worth my time. I was interviewed by a HR employee and some lady with a fancy title who wasn't even a nurse and was not even the manager of the nurses. I have no idea why she interviewed me. Once they were done interviewing me, I whipped out my long list and my pencil. I could see nervousness wash over their faces. They could hardly answer any of my questions. The answers they did give for some of my questions were mediocre. The only question they could answer with certainty was this one. Me, I have been told that the nurses can be mandated to work up to 24 hours. How often are nurses being mandated? HR, well, it's happening quite often, but that's why we are interviewing you. We are hoping to change that. That concluded my questions. I still had quite a few more, but after hearing that I was like, nope. The lady with the fancy title could see I had many more questions written down when I began to fold up my sheet of paper and put it away. She looked so defeated. The pair acted like they've never been questioned during an interview before, and maybe they hadn't. I would think any nurse interviewing at a prison would at least make a mental list of questions to ask. They offered me a job the following evening. Obviously that was a big fat hell no. Story 39. When I was about 21 years old, I was looking for a summer job to help out with college. I found what seemed to be a great opportunity on Craigslist for a part-time job as a sort of driver. Basically, this guy living in Florida was looking for someone to drive his mom, who lived in Chicago, around a couple of days a week. I had a car and didn't mind driving, so this seemed like a pretty sweet gig. We exchanged emails for a bit, before I had a call with him. During this, he starts bringing up about how his mom actually wants to use her car, which he would need to ship up from Florida. Then he starts going on about a money order and how I will be reimbursed in my first check. And that's when I was like, nope, sorry, not falling for that, and said goodbye. I learned that day that if a job on Craigslist seems too good to be true, it probably is. Story 40. Not me, but at best, by an older gentleman decided to work for the holiday season. Halfway through his first day, once the lines in the mobile department started picking up, he straight took off his blue shirt, threw it on the ground, and just walked out. We hailed him as a hero for years after that. Story 41. Sales rep for a medical supply company in 2004. It was advertised as a position where you would be filling orders and delivering product to existing customers. Then I went to the interview, the group interview, where they talked about how this great company had been successful for the last 30-some-odd years, and how some of you lucky candidates will be joining our team and helping to grow our family of customers. This ended up being for on-site soliciting of medical gas and accessories. They were hiring people to go to hospitals, doctors' offices, clinics, nursing homes, etc., to try to sell their product on commission only. I feigned an emergency phone call during the break and left, and they still called me back with an offer. I, as politely as I could, told them to pound sand. Story 42. Oh boy, I've been waiting to tell this one. I got this job working for Up US last year, and long story short, I quit before even getting to work. Before going, I heard how poorly they treated the workers, but I didn't expect it to be that bad. When I showed up for the interviewer was late by an hour. When she finally showed up, she gave everyone a tour of the building. The workers looked like they were about to collapse. It was that hot in room. And the entire time we were there, she was screaming at the employees for not working hard enough, even though they were moving like machines. Once that was over, they told me to go buy work boots and sign a waiver. She then said to come back next Tuesday for my first day. When I got there that day, the first thing she told me was to go home, because they hired too many people and didn't expect everyone they hired to show up on the day. She told us to show up, so again they said to come in next Tuesday. When I showed up, I was told that I wasn't going to be paid for the day, because according to them, I didn't show up the week before. So I said duck it and quit. All that for $9 an hour. Duck that. Oh, and the only thing in the break room was a vending machine that was specially priced, $5 for a Kit Kat. Story 43. Took a job at a Big Lots to unload the truck in the morning. I thought it was the perfect job as it would give me time to get some money before my classes started. Turns out the manager lied about pretty much every aspect related to time and job. Said unloading truck was a 4-hour job. Took us 6. Once the truck was unloaded, I was ready to leave, but apparently we were supposed to stock shelves now. No mention had ever been made of this, but I was there for another 3 hours. Luckily on that first day I had no classes, so I didn't miss anything, but I didn't return for the second. Not only did the manager lie, but it was an absolutely miserable work environment. Was incredibly hot, incredibly disorganized, and the manager insisted on blasting really loud music on really crappy speakers, so I developed a headache really quickly. Story 44. This quarter you guys have really achieved a lot for the company and surpassed our expectations. Just a reminder, we will be having to lay some more people off soon. Peace out, I'll find something else before you make me leave. Story 45. Title posted was Environmental Chemist. Seemed interesting as my background is in environmental science. Walked into the interview and the guy told me I was essentially going to be an expensive garbage man. Yep, I would drive around and collect 55-gallon drums of hazmat material and bring it back for disposal. Job only paid about $13 an hour. Story 46. I was pretty well qualified, but between jobs and receiving financial support, I get an interview with a small company. I'm looking forward to earning some money again. The boss, interviewer, is a banana. At one point he asks me if I feel guilty that people like him are supporting me. I politely inform him that he'll have to support me a bit longer while I find a suitable job. I tell him that the interview is over, but thanks for your time. Story 47. I worked in a dairy barn for about 3 hours. I went to an agricultural college, and my roommate worked at the dairy. He said they needed equipment operators to clean out the barns. I thought, yeah, I can do that, thinking it would be 4 or 5 hours in the afternoon. This was during the summer, and I already had an 8-5 job. I went to the dairy, and they showed me the skid steers and where I needed to sig. After that, they showed me the milking parlor and everything else. I asked what time I might be done. They say 1 or 2 a.m. I said, yeah, no thanks. I called the dairy manager on my way out the door and told him it's not for me. Went to the bar and never looked back. My roommate still gives me crap for making him look bad. Sorry, Calvin. Story 48. Needed a part-time job for the summer. Saw an ad on Craigslist for receptionist, called, left a voicemail, got a call back for an interview, and was hired on the spot. It was for Vector Marketing. I wasn't selling knives because I was a receptionist, but I was calling people others had put down, which was usually everyone in their phone list who they hadn't talked to in years. The lady training me said to call the ghetto names first because they're usually home during the day. I quit after the first day. Story 49. About a week, my boss started talking about me being attractive, and on my last day I brought something to him at his desk and he hugged me, since he was sitting and I wasn't. His face landed directly into my cleavage. I went for lunch and didn't come back. Story 50. Get an interview for data analysis, mining job. Go to the interview. After repeatedly dodging my questions about their business, they finally admit they are one of those companies that advertises timeshare properties. Come and listen to our sales pitch and win a free gift. They need someone to mine prospect data and create their mailing and phone list. I nope it out of there. Didn't even collect my free gift. Story 51. It was my first day working for a family business that had just bought the equipment necessary to install underground fiber optic lines. They had previously been realtors, but had read an article in an entrepreneur's magazine that said $1 mil gross was common. They pulled their 14 and 17-year-old out of school to act as laborers, and the mom and dad were going to run separate crews. I was their first employee hire. As I was setting up my bore path, the mom told me we didn't need to expose an electrical line. We would just drill a few feet underneath it, and we didn't need to expose it. I told her that was ridiculous, reckless and dangerous. The husband then came over and wanted to fight me for insulting his wife, and not 30 seconds into his tirade, the 14 and 17-year-old drilled directly into a large electrical line, which pops the transformer and sounds like an explosion. As I was walking away, the father went from wanting to fight me to chasing his 17-year-old around a retention pond. The mom was begging me not to leave. Nope. Story 52. I tried to get a job through a job placement agency. Originally, they said they would get me an ITS job, but instead they got me an assembly line type job. Turns out at the job I would be surrounded by dangerous machinery that could mangle me. I would be working 12-hour shifts and make min wage. I noped out after watching a 3-hour video on how to not pass. Was not worth it. Story 53. Applied for an office assistant position at 19 that paid $15 an hour. It was a bit farther away than I wanted to go, about half an hour, but I went anyways. Showed up at the place, met with a woman who referred to it as an account manager job, and then told me I was supposed to meet with the regional manager at the regional office, another half an hour away. I went to that interview, at which point it became apparent that they wanted me to sell Verizon Fios door-to-door in a shady area over an hour away from the initial advertised location, and that within a year I could open my own branch in any city I wanted. Stayed for the free lunch they gave me, and then turned down the offer when the guy called. Said they pay all commission, but would pay a $20 daily stipend, which apparently equates to $15 per hour, to drive to the door-to-door sales job. Also, the guy interviewing me was probably less than 5 feet tall and claimed he was a black belt in karate, and all new hires would get karate lessons from him for self-defense while going door-to-door in a high-crime area. So yeah, nope. Story 54. I didn't even last a full shift. I was a production operative at a food factory. 90% of people didn't speak English and shouted at me in Polish. I was shoved and pushed. Wasn't told what the job even was. Had no health and safety training. What my shifts were. No breaks. They had me doing physically impossible stuff. I was meant to do 2 back-to-back shifts, but I just left after the first shift. Story 55. When I was 16, I was recruited for a door-to-door newspaper subscription sales job by a guy I met in a mall parking lot. That wasn't the deal breaker. I met him again the next afternoon, and he took me and a few other new recruits to a housing development in his van. Along the way, he talked practically non-stop and was extremely enthusiastic about the position, like suspiciously so. In retrospect, he'd probably been hitting the Florida snow beforehand. That wasn't the deal breaker. When my new coworkers could get a word in edgewise, I learned that one of them believed aliens were beaming mind control signals that could be blocked by literal tinfoil hats, well, aluminum foil. And while the rest didn't share his zeal on the matter, they all seemed to find it plausible. That wasn't the deal breaker. Fortunately, I didn't end up working with any of those fine specimens of humanity. The buzz boss dropped us all off at different parts of the housing complex, and I canvassed houses on a dreary November day. Over the course of 4 or 5 hours, I only managed to sell 1 daily subscription to a family with deaf parents. The children translated my pitch into signing, and 2 Sunday-only ones, to a pregnant woman whose dog kept trying to force its way past her to jump on me, and to a very furtive woman with 2 black eyes. That wasn't the deal breaker. When the van picked me back up in the evening, I gave the completed subscription forms to the boss. He explained that no matter what option people chose, he signed everyone up for the daily option. Once they noticed they were receiving and being charged for a paper every day, it would be up to them to call the newspaper and deal with the customer retention team to downgrade their subscriptions if they could. He laughed about difficult the newspaper made it to change a subscription. That was the deal breaker. I forget exactly how I quit, but I remember it was in the van with the tinfoil hatter and other soon-to-be former colleagues. I think the shady AF boss asked if I'd be available the next day, and I told him that I wouldn't be coming back. He went off on a tirade about how I was passing up a golden opportunity, would never amount to anything, blah blah blah. I do remember that he ended it with, "There are 2 types of people in this world, winners and losers. Which one are you?" I replied, "Whichever type you are, I'm the other one," and got out of the van. I'm still proud of my teenage self for that one. Story 56. After the first day, I was supposed to be a personal care assistant in a school for a child with behavioral issues. I was only given half of his IEP, which made him sound like a genius. The case manager only told me that he was a difficult case. I had no experience, was only trained via PowerPoints, and spoke with the case manager for 2 minutes, if that, before my first day. On my first day, I walked into the school, saw the case manager, and she dropped me off at the classroom without introducing me to anyone. She didn't even tell me the student's name. Throughout the day, I was bit 3 times, kicked countless times, spit on, cursed at, punched, you name it. I was clearly out of my comfort zone and competence level. At the end of the day, as I was getting him ready to get on the bus to go home, he peed all over the floor of the classroom. That was the final straw for me. Mostly I was upset because important information had been withheld from me, and I felt the case manager was completely unprofessional. I realized that day that the public school system is failing its disabled students miserably. I wasn't trained nearly well enough, and I was passed off to a child who clearly needed more help than I could provide from someone much more experienced than I was. Story 57. I had an interview for a daycare in a AT neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, but decided not to go last minute. They called me a few days later to thank me for coming in and let me know I got the job. Story 58. Was laid off from my job of 12.5 years as a graphic designer for a firm in the DC area. Started looking and got a lead on a contract position for some random company in the area. Spoke to a recruiter over the phone and everything sounded great. Specifics of the designer job and details sounded on par to what I was interested in. We set up an interview. I show up and the receptionist seats me in their oddly large waiting room. Many chairs as I wait. More and more folks come in and sit. I start to get suspicious. Shortly, two sharp-dressed, cool-talking hip bro dudes burst in and introduce themselves to everyone in the waiting room, asking us to all come into the conference room for a little intro video. Now I'm really puzzled. The conference room fills up. It's just a large room with many chairs all facing a screen with a projector in the center on a table. The bro dudes come up front and do a little spiel on how cool the company is and that we're now going to enjoy a video. Lights go down. Video starts playing. Turns out it's a company that sells benefits packages to law enforcement and public safety groups. The video makes it look like you work for a fraternity, sorority with parties, hip young folks getting lots of money and having lots of fun. Reminds me of Renholm Industries. That's the sort of place this is, Jen. A lot of people, not doing much work and having affairs. I stood up and walked out after about 10 minutes into the video. As I did, the bro dudes paused the video and called me out in front of the group. They were prepared for this. Where are you going? I'm leaving. Why? Because I'm leaving. They continued to ridicule me and told me I was making a mistake. I told them that they had just flat out lied to me on the phone and laughed as I walked out the door. Duck companies that bait and switch you. Like that in particular. I learned a good lesson that day. Story 59. Had an interview for a quite well-known chain e-cig shop in the UK. The interview took place in an actual basement with the area manager. 20 minutes was spent telling me how I do what I'm told. And that's it. Another 20 minutes on how the company wasn't in liquidation. Red flags all around at this point. After that, the guy literally threw a pen at me and said, "Try and sell me that." At this point, I just said, "Do you want a pen?" "No." "Okay, bye." And walk about. Edit, and I stopped smoking through vaping. I told this to him and that I'd love to help others do the same. His response was, "We don't want helpers, we want sellers." Story 60. Had a corporation that needed serious infrastructure to be upgraded to qualify for a grant, loan. Their networks and computers had to meet a security baseline to qualify. These were computers that were operating on Vista, XP, and 7 scattered throughout the 300 workstations, coupled with shoddy networking, old Sting XP fiber optic switches, cabling, etc. To meet the baseline, all workstations and servers had to have some sort of AV. All endpoints hardened in Windows 10 Enterprise. To do that required a large amount of money, something that explaining to upper management and their resident CIO that this was important to meet this requirement. They shrugged it off and told me to do the best I can to meet the requirement and continue using the shoddy equipment, use bootleg copies of Windows 10, and whatever else to make it work. CIO, I guess, never heard of a security audit that the other branches employ and would be disaster on me if I carried those out. I put in my 2-week notice after countless times to explain in detail why the current methodology will never work, and they will never receive their multi-million-dollar grant. Story 61. I worked for a newspaper for most of a week. I was expected to use my own laptop and software, know it, and I'd have to share logins and passwords with 3 other people and guess when they would need them. Story 62. Not to me, but to a friend. We are both substitute teachers. She worked at this rough local high school, which I knew better and to stay away from. When she asked a kid to sit down, he pulled a gun on her. She immediately packed up her things and walked out of the building, only stopping to drop her badge off at the front desk without any words. Story 63. JCPenney. I came to work to set up shelves and things. Store technician. But my boss handed me a mop and said someone lady pooped in an aisle when she didn't get her way. I handed the mop back, said I'm not hazmat certified but he is, and noped out. Story 64. First day at work in a care home for young adults with various learning difficulties. I'm being shown round and introduced to the clients by my immediate superior. We get to the room of a young guy, 19, severe autism and a couple of other issues, and she tells me that this guy is difficult, but they have a great way of dealing with him that ensures he behaves for a few days. Any bad behavior from him is dealt with by going to the supply closet, getting out the brown parcel tape, putting it on his arms and legs and then ripping it off as fast as possible in order to pull out as many arm and leg hairs as I could. I was also told not to worry about restraining him, as there was always someone working who would be able to help me hold him down. I noped the duck out of there as soon as we left his room and went straight to the local authority, who gave no craps about the situation. The company was brought out a few months later, and the majority of the staff got fired, so I hope he's being looked after by better people now. Story 65. I went to an interview at a car dealership, and the first time I was there was kind of like the screening process to screen applicants for what I thought was an admin office position from Indeed. The guy who talked to all of us on that first day was a self-proclaimed big deal in the industry as far as training and overall success goes. 70-ish-year-old male. Against my better judgment, I came back when I was called for the second day, which was the day everyone from previous screenings kind of came together. He started with this presentation about how the car industry worked and how there was a metric ton of money to be made. Which isn't wrong, but I was misled as far as what, if any, legitimate salaried position was available. He then told us that the owner of the franchise was going to be interviewing everyone individually, and that we should all study up on what he'd just taught. There were 30 of us, and we had already sat through a 2-hour presentation about something we didn't want in a 75-room in Ducking, July. I waited around for maybe 2 people to go in and leave after their interview. Unbelievably, another hour and 15 minutes, and then just left. It was on my day off, and I had already wasted enough time on these people who clearly had no consideration for any of us. It was brutal. So much nope. Story 66. Then we expect you to work a minimum of 60 hours a week. Me, is there overtime pay after 48 hours? Them, you're paid a generous $30,000 salary. Nope. Story 67. Went for an interview. Turned out it was just an MLM con. Things started feeling off when all of the applicants were given a talk about how great it is to be your own boss and how much damn money you can make by 2 extremely punchable 19-year-old haircuts who mostly just bragged about how expensive their tacky designer shoes were. Story 68. Interviewed for an English teaching gig in Japan. Only after about 10 minutes of normal questions did they ask how my singing voice was. It turns out the classes are calling little kids on the phone and singing English songs with them on speakerphone. Nope. Story 69. I compose music for film and visual media. I once spoke with a director about scoring his feature-length film. We talked about style and deadline and other details. When the budget came up, he told me that upon completion of the score, he'd pay me $25, $30 if it was really good. I did not score that movie. Story 70. I worked for more than 5 years at UPS and wanted to be a supervisor during school. More tuition reimbursement and more hours. But they wouldn't hire me throughout the years and hired tons of people ahead of me because I wouldn't yell at my coworkers to motivate them. Once I graduated, I applied for even more higher-up jobs like I was going to stay. Once I got the job, I used it on my resume and left immediately. Story 71. Not exactly a job, but I noped out of joining a rugby team after just 2 hours. The coach gathered the team after practice and said, team bonding competition this weekend. Sounds cool, right? Here's the contest. Find the oldest woman possible. You have to get her age by seeing her ID. You must then make it as far to home plate as you can and produce team eyewitness, as in your teammate is in the room as it happens, photo or video evidence. Winner is the one who has the best balance of old age, nearness to home, and solid evidence. The ducking coach put them up to this. Not the players, the coach. No thanks. I like not being in prison and off the registry. Story 72. I interviewed for a job as a morning show co-host in radio, and not only did they break down how I was allowed to dress, they flat out asked me if I'd ever posed nude for Playboy or done anything that could embarrass them. Now, I had never posed nude, but the fact that they were already dictating my off-air personal life made me walk away. My mother, a beautiful, non-cursing, graceful Southern woman, upon hearing this story, simply said, "You should have smiled and said, 'Oh no, not Playboy.' But does Hustler count? I miss my mom." Story 73. I transferred to a different Steak and Shake when I moved. I worked there for 2 weeks before quitting. Not only were they disgusting, but a few weeks earlier the town had flooded during a shift I was working. Damage from the flood caused sewage to rise up from the floor drains, causing about 2 inches of sewer water to sit on the floor. They didn't close down the store. Instead, we made food while walking through sewer water. It smelled horrible, and I can't imagine how unsanitary it was. I called the health department and they got in trouble. I witnessed the big boss come in and talk to the manager. After that, I never returned. Story 74. During orientation at a Shaw's, when I discovered I would be severely underpaid. Now actually working the floor at a place, Subway, 2 days. They refused to provide PPE. I had to buy my own and take it home each shift. Also, they reuse hats there for employees. Now, Story 75. I was at an interview to be a graphic designer for a very small printing firm. I was being interviewed by the owner, who was a highly agitated kind of guy. A call came in from a customer and he was on the line with them for about 5 minutes yelling at the customer. After the call, he offered me the job, but I declined. If he could treat a customer that way, I can imagine how he would treat employees. The place went out of business not long after that. Story 76. As a programmer, you get to know people who left before you started by the code they left behind. You see weird, crappy code, do a git blame to see who's the person that can explain that mess to you, and you discover it's somebody who no longer works there. Do it enough times and you start to remember their name. After a while, I was job hunting, and after a job interview, I met the guy who interviewed me turned out to be the guy whose code has given me endless headaches over the past years. I don't like judging people for their old code, but I decided to try my luck somewhere else instead. Story 77. Mine was during the interview. They asked how I deal with difficult coworker. Fair enough, as almost every job has people with personalities. I give a solid answer, and I think that's that, but they go deeper. What if they get angry a lot? What if they yell? What if they are lightly violent and throw stuff and have temper tantrums? At this point, the alarms are going off in my head. They clearly have someone who has knowledge they can't fire, but they can't get people to stay long enough to replace. They offered me the job at the end of the interview, but I noped out.